Your hand tightens around the controller. Your jaw clenches. Your heart is pounding for a game that isn't even trying to kill you. And in the next few seconds, you're going to do something you'll almost certainly regret. Throw the controller, slam the desk, hit the power button, and walk away. You call it rage quitting. Everyone does. But the real reason it happens is far stranger than the game made you mad. Here's the strange part first. It isn't losing that makes you rage quit. Plenty of people lose calmly, shrug, and try again. Something else is happening in that moment. Something older than the console in your hands, older than the screen, older than language itself. To understand it, you have to go back. Not to your last match. Back about 2 million years. To a world with no controllers and no screens, where losing didn't mean a game over banner. It meant losing food, losing status, losing your place in the group. And in that world, your brain built a very specific tool for moments exactly like this one. That tool is anger. For a long time, psychologists assumed it was simple. Frustrate someone, block their goal, and aggression follows automatically. That was the frustration-aggression hypothesis proposed in 1939 by psychologist John Dollard and his colleagues at Yale. Block the goal. Out comes the aggression. Simple cause, simple effect. But anger turned out to be more complicated than that, and far more purposeful. In 2009, researchers Aaron Sell, John Tooby, and Leda Cosmides at the Center for Evolutionary Psychology proposed something different. They called it the recalibrational theory of anger. Anger, they argued, didn't evolve just to vent frustration. It evolved as a negotiating tool, a way to recalibrate how much weight other people place on your interests. Think about what that actually means. When someone treats you as if you don't matter, ignoring your effort, taking what's yours, humiliating you in front of others, your brain doesn't just register sadness. It fires up anger, a signal that says, raise my value in your eyes, or there will be a cost. For most of human history, that cost was real. A partner who kept slighting you might lose your cooperation on the next hunt. A rival who humiliated you might face your fists in front of the whole group, and everyone would remember who won. Picture that ancestral moment a little more clearly. A hunter returns empty-handed after a rival mocks his failed throw in front of the group. A woman's contribution to the gathering is dismissed as worthless by someone jockeying for status. In each case, the sting isn't really about the missed throw or the lighter basket. It's about what the group will now think you're worth and what that means for whether you eat tomorrow. Anger in that world was never a luxury emotion. It was a survival tool with a very specific job. Renegotiate your value before your value drops any further. Now here's the twist. Your brain does not know the difference between a rival human and a difficult boss fight. When a game punishes you unfairly, a cheap death, a broken hitbox, a teammate who abandons you mid-fight, your ancient recalibration system switches on exactly the way it would for a real betrayal. The game isn't a person. It doesn't care about your status. But the part of your brain running this program doesn't check for that. It only checks one thing. Was I just treated as if I don't matter? And a pixelated boss killing you for the 9th time in a row answers with a resounding yes. That's the strange part. Rage quitting was never really about the game. It was about respect. The oldest currency your brain knows how to track. There's a second layer to this, and it comes from a 2014 study out of Oxford. Psychologist Andrew Przybylski and his colleague Richard Ryan, a motivational psychologist at the University of Rochester, wanted to know what actually makes gamers hostile. For years, the assumption was violent content. Blood, guns, brutal storylines. So they tested it directly across several experiments, comparing violent and nonviolent games side by side, and surveying hundreds of avid gamers about their real experiences. The violence wasn't the trigger. What predicted hostility, again and again, was competence. Specifically, the feeling of being made to feel incompetent. Clunky controls. Games that didn't respond the way you expected. Losing not because you played badly, but because the system worked against you. Przybylski put it simply. When a game undermines your sense of mastery, it threatens your ego. And an ego under threat responds the way egos have always responded. It gets defensive. It gets angry. Read that again, slowly. It was never the monster on screen making you furious. It was the feeling that your own competence, the thing you'd built through hours of practice, had just been publicly disrespected by a system that didn't play fair. That single insight rewires how you should think about your worst gaming moments. The rage isn't random. It isn't a character flaw. It's a status alarm, hundreds of thousands of years old, going off in a context it was never designed for. So, why does it feel so intense? Why does your body actually shake sometimes? Because your nervous system isn't running a this is just a video game subroutine in the background. It's running the same hardware your ancestors used when a rival stole their kill, when an ally broke a promise, when the group's respect for them dropped in an instant. Heart rate spikes, muscles tense, ready for confrontation that will never come. Attention narrows sharply onto the exact source of the perceived slight, the enemy player, the broken mechanic, the unfair boss. This isn't overreaction. This is your body preparing for a negotiation it genuinely believes is happening in real time, with real stakes, even though the only thing on the other side of the screen is code. This also explains something you've probably noticed but never quite put into words. Not everyone rage quits at the same rate. The players who explode hardest are usually the ones who care most about being seen as skilled, the ones whose sense of identity is most tightly wound around competence. That isn't a coincidence, and it isn't a coincidence that the same pattern shows up far outside of gaming. The manager who snaps at a junior employee's honest question, the driver who lays on the horn over a minor mistake, the parent who overreacts to a rolled eye from a teenager. In every case, the surface trigger looks small. What's actually happening underneath is the same ancient alarm, firing because something or someone just treated their competence, their authority, their standing as if it didn't matter. It gets even messier in team-based games, and this is where a lot of players feel the rage hit hardest. When you lose alone, you know exactly who to hold responsible. When you lose as a group, blame scatters. Decades of research into group behavior shows that people take bigger risks and feel less personally responsible when they're part of a team than when they're acting alone, because the psychological cost of failure gets quietly divided among everyone present. That's part of why a teammate's mistake can trigger a sharper burst of anger than your own. Your brain isn't just tracking your competence anymore, it's auditing everyone else's contribution to the group. The exact calculation your ancestors ran constantly when their survival depended on who could actually be trusted to pull their weight. And that's why walking away, throwing the controller, slamming the desk actually feels like it works, at least for a moment. In ancestral terms, withdrawal was itself a message. If your interests weren't being respected, removing your cooperation was one of the only bargaining chips available to you. Quit the hunt. Quit the alliance. Quit the game. The mechanism doesn't know the target is a save file instead of a person. It just knows the recalibration signal has been sent, and for a few seconds that feels like enough. Of course, this creates a genuine mismatch. In the ancestral world, that anger was aimed at an actual social actor, someone capable of registering your fury and adjusting their behavior towards you. A game cannot do that. It cannot notice your rage and decide to treat you with more respect next time. So the ancient tool fires perfectly and lands nowhere. That mismatch is part of why the aftermath of a rage quit so often feels hollow instead of resolved. The negotiation your body was fully prepared to have never actually took place. Even the games most likely to trigger this response follow a pattern that makes sense once you see it clearly. Notoriously difficult games, the kind built around punishing precision and unforgiving failure states, generate some of the most infamous rage quit stories on the internet. It's tempting to think that's just because they're hard, but difficulty alone doesn't explain it. Plenty of difficult activities, puzzles, sports, instruments, don't provoke the same explosive reaction. What these games specifically do is combine difficulty with the constant, repeated message that you personally are the reason for the failure. There's no broken die roll to blame, no teammate to point at, no bad luck to hide behind. Just you, failing publicly, over and over against a system that never once acknowledges the effort you're putting in. That combination, high stakes to your sense of competence plus total personal responsibility for the outcome, is precisely the cocktail the recalibration system evolved to respond to most intensely. There's an odd comfort in knowing this, though. The next time your hands are shaking over a boss fight, you're not malfunctioning. You're not weak or overly sensitive or bad at handling losses. You're running one of the oldest, most finely tuned pieces of software the human mind has ever built. A system shaped over millions of years to protect your standing in a small group of people who could genuinely help or hurt you. It just happens to be running on hardware in a world it was never built for. And maybe that reframes the whole habit differently. Competitive games are, in a strange way, one of the only places left in modern life where that ancient status tracking system gets triggered on command dozens of times an hour, every single day. No wonder it feels so primal. It is primal. You're not just playing a game. You're renegotiating your worth against an opponent who was never listening in the first place, using a system built for a world that no longer exists. In a body that hasn't gotten the memo. Your hand tightens around the controller again. Your jaw clenches again. But this time, you know exactly what's happening and exactly how old it really is.